Hello, and welcome to the Megan Taylor Creative Podcast, a show for entrepreneurs looking to grow their business with digital marketing. In this episode, I'll be sharing with you the 7 principles of creative content marketing. Let's get started. So, if you've spent any time on my website or if you follow me on social media, then you may know that Megan Taylor Creative works with a methodology called creative content marketing. And what I invented creative content marketing for was firstly as a unique selling point for my marketing agency. I saw a lot of content marketing agencies who had a particular focus on the SEO not really show that they could deliver creative content. They could deliver content that answered to search engines, but I just noticed that there was kind of a gap in the market in that sense, and there wasn't as many agencies focusing specifically on creativity, and that's really the essence of the Megan Taylor creative brand. So I created this methodology and I've written about it a few times, but I thought what would be really interesting in this episode of the podcast would just be to basically sit down and explain the 7 principles of creative content marketing so that you can actually apply these to your own content creation sessions and whenever you're sitting down to create content. If you're ever struggling to create interesting content, then you know that you can actually refer back to this methodology and the principles of creative content marketing, and you can use those to kind of inspire creativity and get yourself out of a content funk. So yeah, that's what this episode is going to be about, and as usual, I'm just going to get straight into the topic. Let's get started. So the first principle of the creative content marketing methodology is to write for people, not robots. I'm going to start this one by saying that I'm not anti-SEO. In fact, I love SEO, and I've actually spent a lot of the last 4 years doing keyword research, doing outreach for backlinks, and general on-page SEO for web content. But I personally don't think that it should be your primary goal to rank on the first page of Google for content. I think that SEO and content, although they enhance one another, you should see them separately in a sense, because otherwise your goals for content can start to get a bit clouded, and that's when you start to create content that's a bit more diluted and bland and just kind of feels a bit meh because it appeals more to search engines than to your target audience. And that kind of brings me to the main point of this principle, which is to remind you that you should actually be aiming to help people with your content. That should be your primary goal. And that's also Google's primary goal. And I think the thing that a lot of people forget about SEO is that Google wants you to create the most helpful content that is as close to the user's search intent for a particular query as possible. So that means that you really need to sit down and think about the best way that you can approach a topic. How are you going to be able to provide the most value? How are you actually going to really get into the meat of the question and provide a full answer? But it's not just about addressing search intent either. You also need to show that you can emphasize with your reader, and showing that you understand your audience pain points is a big part of creating effective content. Not only will it instill trust in your readers, but it will inspire your audience to take action, which at the end of the day is what we all want. Whether that be to download a free ebook, to subscribe to your email newsletter, or follow you on social media, whatever it is, there's going to be something that you want your readers to do after they've read your content. It may even just be to read more blog posts, right? But just remember that the way to do that is by showing empathy, and this will in turn humanize your brand, which is where trust comes in. I think that brands that appear quite cold, especially a lot of corporate businesses, I think, or corporate agencies, those kind of brands, I think a lot of people are starting to get quite intimidated by, and they'd rather work with a brand that shows emotion and shows that they understand the pains that they're going through. So just be very wary of that. And to bring this point to a close, I suppose, it's good to realise just how important showing emotion is actually going to be for succeeding in SEO. And this kind of comes into play with a new search engine that Google's just rolled out. It's called BERT. I will leave some more information about BERT in the show notes. And the amazing thing about BERT, which is a machine learning model, is that it can actually distinguish and understand emotions from vague text. So using power words is really going to strengthen your content, because it's going to signal to Google that you are actually writing for humans and your content is going to be easily consumable and relatable, and that's exactly what they're looking for right now. So the second principle of creative content marketing is to tell stories. And I can't emphasize how important storytelling is to ensuring that you create the most effective content possible. As humans, we've loved to tell them for thousands of years as a way to communicate how we feel or to communicate a certain message in a universal way. So that being said, use stories as a way to communicate your brand's messages, your brand's values, your own story, but also use them as a way to transport the reader into your world, show them how your offering is going to transform their life. And the more immersive you can make it, the better, because once your reader starts to see how your offering is going to help them, then that's going to make them realize, oh wait, I do have a problem that needs to be solved, and maybe I should go and explore this more. So they'll go and learn more about your product. Or alternatively, it will also raise awareness levels. Sometimes people aren't always ready to buy straight away, and that's okay. That's what brand awareness campaigns are for. It means that when the person is ready to buy, then in the back of their mind, they'll have a brand that they're already aware of, that they kind of trust and know about, that they'll explore further down the line. And with storytelling, think about the sort of format and structure that you want to use. So for example, fables. Fables are one of the oldest types of stories to tell, especially with Greek myths and things like that. They were used heavily as a way to communicate a message or a moral, and you can use the same principle in your content. But also I would actually go one step further and use more of a in-depth story structure that's kind of taken from fiction novel writing and implement that into your content or your business. So here's the sort of structure that I would use to tell a story in my content, and I would use this structure as like a beginning, middle, end. So if you're going to use this structure, make sure to do it in this order, and you may be able to change the order every so often, but I feel like for this particular format to be effective, you just need to do it in this order. So the first point of this structure is the problem, and this is the problem that your customer has. So think about what you've done in your previous content strategy sessions as far as buyer personas go. Think about what their main pain points are and what their frustrations are, and really show just how much it's affecting their life. And then the flip side of that is the next point, which is the promise. And the promise is there to show your readers what their life could look like if they didn't have this problem anymore. And then you want to promise a solution, so you want to incentivize them to keep reading. After this, you want to show the transformation. So show the transformation step by step, and fuel this by using persuasive writing techniques like social proof and repetition to give real life insight into what their life could be like once they start using your product or service. And finally, the end of this story would be the answer to the call, or what is more traditionally known in marketing, the CTA. This is where you persuade your audience to take the action that you want them to take. So remember that this part needs to be entirely focused on the reader and not you. This is a big big mistake that I see a lot of brands make. I think that they use I too much. I think the CTA needs to be very direct and you need to use you a lot. And again, it's the repetition, it's the making the reader feel like, oh yes, no, I do actually need to go and do it. And here you also really want to use those power words that we spoke about earlier, because a lot of the time your audience will essentially react based on emotion. So you want to kind of drive that emotion with your content, if that makes sense. And just bear in mind that when you're telling stories, I know we kind of briefly touched upon this, but it's just worth mentioning again, who basically tell your story from the point of view of your target audience. And my recommendation would be to decide which buyer persona, which customer segment you're speaking directly from, so that you can start basically talking like them. And I would talk in a way that you would talk to a friend. I think that even brands that are a bit more formal, when you're creating certain types of content, especially awareness stage content, being very opening and friendly is so important to reassuring your audience and making them feel like they can trust you and loosening them up a little bit. Because like I said before, they might not even know that they have a problem. And sometimes it's up to you to convince them that actually, yes, they do have a problem and that they need to act on it. So just be friendly, be a little bit direct, but not too direct. Don't ever talk down to your reader. I think that sometimes it can work depending on your brand and the sort of product that you're selling and the sort of audience that you're marketing to. But generally, I would be on a level playing field with your target audience at all times. So that's the second principle of creative content marketing. And I would use this throughout all types of content, not just web content, but social media posts. Ads actually can work really well with this kind of format, depending on the ad platform that you're using, and also email marketing as well. Email marketing is really good for stories, and because email marketing is very visual, you can explain and illustrate your points one step further with images. And that leads me nicely onto my next point. The third principle of creative content marketing, as I alluded to earlier, is to use visuals. And visuals are a bit of a tricky subject when it comes to content marketing, especially for businesses, because I think that a lot of businesses fall into the trap early on of using stock images. And whilst I think that there is a time and a place to use stock images, I think that there's so many great tools out there like Canva, like Photoshop, that really allow you to add a creative element to your images. And I think you should be leveraging that, because by going one step further and creating intriguing visuals, not only are you going to have more of a chance of catching the attention of your target audience with a striking visual, but you're also going to be able to show them straight away who you are and what your branding is, and that's going to raise awareness from the beginning. And I also think as well that you can use text overlays to further illustrate your point. That said, I would be careful with text overlays. I would use them sparingly. I think that if you need a lot of text in a visual, then I would actually argue that the visual doesn't need to be there, if it makes sense. If it's more text based, I would just keep that as text. But if you're only using text to show comparison or to point towards key features, for example, then it can be a really great tool to further illustrate your point without the need for written content. The fourth principle of creative content marketing is to use your imagination. As you can tell by the name, creativity is really important to making the most out of this methodology. And to be creative, you need to use your imagination. But as an adult, it can be really difficult to get into the creative headspace because we're often so distracted by our responsibilities and we're so bogged down by a lot of the daily menial tasks of adult life that being creative can be difficult, because being creative requires a sense of play, which we don't always have access to. But that said, there are a few things that you can do to fuel your creativity and get the creative juices flowing, and they are as followed. Read a book, watch a film, go for a walk, exercise, do some stream of consciousness writing, listen to music, So these are just a few tips to help you get started and bring back some creativity in your life. But ultimately, by using your imagination, you'll be able to generate more ideas that are unique to you. However, it's important to remember that when you are coming up with ideas, to not put too much pressure on yourself to come up with something that is 100% original. You just need to be able to come up with a unique spin or angle on a topic. And once you get into that creative headspace, you'll actually be surprised at how quickly you can come up with creative ideas. Even if the topic's been covered a lot of different times by your competitors, you'll be surprised at how many new angles you can come up with once you're in that headspace. The next principle of creative content marketing is to bring in your life experiences. And this is actually one of my favorite principles of the entire methodology because I think that this is really what makes our brands unique and different. I think that it's us as people who people really buy from. People don't necessarily buy products, they buy the brand. Obviously, for example, in high-end fashion, a lot of the time people just buy a purse because it's Gucci, even if they have a lot of purses. So if you start creating a brand that has a lot of power and authority from the beginning, then it will be easier to create a connection with your audience through your life experience, and they'll want to hear from you, and then they'll start being loyal to you, and then they'll start essentially waiting for you to create content and to create those new releases because they know that you're going to have an impact in their life because they trust you and they trust your message and they feel like they know you. And some ways to bring in your life experiences, and perhaps my most favorite way, is to tell anecdotes. And anecdotes are a really powerful way to illustrate a certain point, and they can be really good for when you're trying to convey your brand story or a particular value. Yeah, anecdotes just bring in a lot of personality. So yeah, just always remember your life experiences and use your life experience to tell stories and come up with new content ideas. And there's always something interesting happening in life, and sometimes the best stories aren't fiction. So just bear that in mind when you're generating ideas in the future. The sixth principle of creative content marketing is to follow trends. And this may seem like a bit counterproductive because trends are obviously popular and in circulation and a lot of different brands are using them. But I wouldn't necessarily use trends to fuel all your content. I would use it to start looking at creating content differently. I think especially with things like Instagram Reels and TikTok, I think that those platforms really allow for creativity, and a lot of the trends over there are actually quite interesting and unique, and you see a lot of people doing different things with content over there in terms of format and how they present it to the audience. So follow trends in the sense that you follow them to keep updated and then use them as inspiration as to how you can present your content in a new and interesting way, but in a way that's familiar enough that's not going to confuse people. I guess the thing is, like with being creative and making creative content, you want to strike that balance between being familiar and having a certain sense of consistency, but also not being afraid to experiment. And I think that emerging trends really allow you to kind of strike that balance because you can use those trends to kind of implement new content types and content formats in your content mix. So yeah, just use them in a different way to what you think you might. The last principle of creative content marketing is to do what your competitors aren't doing. And this, I guess, complete 180 on the previous point. But actually, I would argue that the way I kind of explained how to use trends, this works together really well. I would look at how your competitors are creating content, the sort of content that you want to make. I would look at how they're using trends and then kind of think about what they're not doing, what gaps they have in their own content content strategy that I'm sure they're aware of, and kind of jump on that and fill in that gap like a business would come in and fill in a gap of a particular market. That's what you need to do with your content if you want to stay competitive and you want to give users a reason to follow you over your competitors, because at the end of the day, your competitors are competitors for a reason, because they're strong brands and they also know how to make content, but not everyone is perfect, and it's good to learn from their faults so that you can create a better content strategy than them. So yeah, that was the 7 principles of creative content marketing. Just to give you a brief summary so that you can write these down and remember for next time. Number 1 is to write for people, not robots. Number 2 is to tell stories. Number 3 is to implement visuals. Number 4 is to use your imagination. Number 5 is to bring in your life experience. Number 6 is to follow trends. And number 7 is to do what your competitors aren't doing. I really hoped that this helped you get into the creative flow and start generating new ideas and new ways of how you could maybe create content. I hope it inspired you to also look at the way that you're currently creating content and your processes and how you could maybe do it a bit more effectively to ensure that your content is unique and interesting, because at the end of the day, with so much content out there, you really do need to ensure that it is going to appeal to your target audience, and you need to ensure that it's not what your competitors are doing. You want to stay competitive, you want to do something different. I think there's a time and a place to create content that's, just kind of run of the mill, or content that's similar to what your competitors are doing. Like if there's a particular trend that you want to cover in your industry, or if you're reporting on some news. But generally for day-to-day content creation, especially educational content, in the awareness stage and in the consideration and decision stage as well, you want to use this methodology to give you the best chance of success and standing out from your competitors. So yeah, like I said, that's everything for this episode. Obviously, I've been speaking a lot about the creative content marketing methodology, which is the methodology that my agency, Megan Taylor Creative, uses for our content creation process. And if you did want to work with Megan Taylor Creative, you can either get in touch with me over on Twitter or Instagram. My handles are at Megan LJ Taylor on both platforms, or alternatively, you can head to our website and there's a contact form or a quote form that you can fill out, and we can get in touch with you and work out how we can help you with your projects. So yeah, thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Megan Taylor Creative Podcast. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you liked this episode, please like the video you're watching and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Alternatively, if you want to support the show, you can head to our Ko-fi page. We really appreciate any support, so thank you. As always, we'll speak to you next week. Thank you for listening. Bye.